Business Solutions, how can I help you?
I am ready. Well, that is biblical. I'm not even trying to kill people and someone dies. Remember this, the wedding. Tequila? Johansson.
We need to find the person who took that case.
Wackos from the Bolivia job?
The twins?
Yeah, not so sure they're twins.
Get
You stabbed me? I missed my stop.
something else going on here.
Hi. You don't remember?
Do you know what happens?
Yes.
Your blood congeals, clogging your veins.
Waiting for us in Kyoto.
The White Death, with his army of assassins.
Hook for your Bullet Train 2022 movie review and facts video. What happens when the world's deadliest assassins all end up on the same bullet train? Twists, non-stop action, and crazy secrets make every stop more dangerous than the last. And stay tuned with Filmy Review Hub for the full review, hidden facts, and ending explained. Anna Bullet Train is a 2022 American action comedy movie directed by David Leitch. It's based on the 2010 Japanese novel by Kotaro Isaka. The story follows a bunch of highly skilled assassins who all end up riding the same Japanese bullet train. At first, it seems like they're all there for different jobs, but before long, they realize their missions are connected in ways they never expected. That's when things get wild and everyone starts going head to head in a crazy fight for survival. The movie features an all-star cast including Brad Pitt, Joey King, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Tyree Henry, Andrew Koji, Hiroyuki Sanada, Michael Shannon, Bad Bunny, and Sandra Bullock. Every character brings a different vibe to the story, mixing hilarious moments with intense action and unexpected twists that keep the movie moving at full speed. Filming kicked off in Los Angeles in November 2020 and wrapped up in March 2021 while the COVID-19 pandemic was still happening. Even with all the challenges during that time, the filmmakers managed to complete production and create a movie packed with stylish action, awesome visuals, and over-the-top fight scenes. Bullet Train had its world premiere in Paris on July 18, 2022, before hitting theaters across the United States on August 5 of 2022. Critics had mixed opinions about the movie. Some people loved its fast-paced action, funny dialogue, colorful characters, and unique style, while others felt the story was a little too chaotic. The movie also sparked conversations because some fans thought a Japanese story should have featured more Japanese actors in major roles. Even with the mixed reviews, Bullet Train turned out to be a solid hit at the box office. Made on a budget of around $86-90 million, it earned about $239 million worldwide, proving that audiences enjoyed its blend of action, comedy, mystery, and non-stop entertainment. Today, it's considered one of the most fun and stylish action movies of 2022, especially for fans who love fast-paced thrill rides with plenty of laughs and surprising plot twists. In Tokyo, Yuichi Kimura, Andrew Koji, is out for revenge after someone pushes his young son Wataru off a rooftop. His father, known as the elder Hiroyuki Sanada, tells him to board a bullet train later that night because the man responsible is expected to be there. At the same time, former assassin Ladybug Brad Pitt gets pulled back into the game. His handler, Maria Sandra Bullock, gives him a simple mission: get on the bullet train heading to Kyoto and steal a mysterious briefcase. Ladybug only takes the job because another assassin named Carver calls in sick. Even though the mission sounds easy, Ladybug is nervous because he believes he's cursed with terrible luck. Almost every recent job he's taken has ended with someone dying by accident. Also, riding the train is a young assassin called the Prince, Joey King. She looks like an innocent schoolgirl, but she's actually smart, manipulative, and extremely dangerous. She's the one who attacked Wataru and tricked Yuichi into getting on the train. Another pair of passengers are British assassin brothers Lemon, Brian Tyree Henry, and Tangerine, Aaron Taylor Johnson. They're transporting both the briefcase, which contains a $10 million ransom, and the kidnapped son of the feared crime boss known as White Death, Michael Shannon. White Death is a ruthless underworld leader who hired the brothers after they impressed him during a dangerous mission in Bolivia. His son is played by Logan Lerman. Years earlier, a powerful Japanese crime boss named Minegishi controlled the Yakuza. White Death, who was originally connected to the Russian KGB, slowly worked his way into the organization before betraying Minegishi. He wiped out Minegishi's entire clan and took over the criminal empire for himself. White Death's wife later died in a tragic car accident, something that would change his life forever. As Yuichi searches the train's first-class section for the man who attacked his son, he finds the prince instead. Before he can react, she shocks him with a taser and takes control of the situation. Meanwhile, Ladybug successfully steals the briefcase from Lemon and Tangerine. But before he can leave the train, another assassin appears. This one is the Wolf, Bad Bunny, a deadly Mexican hitman who believes Ladybug poisoned everyone at his wedding, including his new wife. Ironically, Ladybug had actually tried to save them and has no idea who the Wolf even is. The only reason he was at the wedding was because he was working there disguised as a waiter. A fast and brutal fight breaks out between the two. During the battle, the Wolf throws a knife, but it bounces off the briefcase and flies straight back into his own chest, killing him instantly. Ladybug hides the body by making it look like the Wolf is just another passenger sleeping in his seat. While that's happening, the prince tells Yuichi the truth. She admits she pushed Wataru off the rooftop on purpose just to lure Yuichi onto the train. She also reveals that one of her men is guarding Wataru in the hospital with orders to kill him if anything happens to her. Her real goal is to force Yuichi into assassinating White Death. As Lemon and Tangerine search the train for the missing briefcase, White Death's son suddenly dies after being poisoned. His death looks exactly like the mysterious mass poisoning that killed the Wolf's wedding guests months earlier. The prince later tells Tangerine that she saw Ladybug carrying the missing briefcase. Believing she's telling the truth, Tangerine immediately goes after Ladybug. Ladybug eventually finds Lemon and offers to return the briefcase if Lemon lets him leave the train peacefully. Lemon believes Ladybug murdered White Death's son. When Lemon says he knows Ladybug killed someone, Ladybug assumes he's talking about the Wolf and accidentally admits it. That misunderstanding leads to another intense fight. Lemon gets knocked unconscious, but later realizes Ladybug wasn't responsible for White Death's son's death after all. Meanwhile, the prince and Yuichi recover the briefcase and secretly fill it with explosives. They also rig Yuichi's gun to explode when fired as a backup plan to kill White Death soon after Ladybug runs into Tangerine. Another fight breaks out and Ladybug kicks Tangerine off the moving train. Amazingly, Tangerine survives and climbs back aboard. He eventually realizes Ladybug doesn't have the briefcase and didn't kill White Death's son. Even so, Tangerine still wants Ladybug to take the blame because he needs someone to answer to White Death. Lemon later finds Yuichi and the prince together. Confused about what's happening, he believes Yuichi kidnapped an innocent schoolgirl because the prince plays her role perfectly. Lemon shoots Yuichi, seriously injuring him. Moments later, Lemon drinks bottled water that Ladybug had secretly mixed with sleeping medicine, causing him to pass out. The prince then shoots Lemon and hides both injured men inside a bathroom. Ladybug's problems aren't over yet. He runs into another assassin called the Hornet, Zazie Beetz, a poison expert disguised as a train mascot. She reveals that she poisoned White Death's son and the wolf's wedding guests using modified boomslang snake venom. During their fight, both of them get exposed to the poison. Ladybug manages to grab the only antidote and saves himself, while Hornet dies from the venom. Later, Tangerine discovers evidence proving that the prince shot Lemon. Lemon had secretly placed a sticker on her, marking her as suspicious. Just before Tangerine can kill her, Ladybug attacks him. During the struggle, Tangerine is accidentally shot with his own gun and dies. His final words are spent trying to convince Ladybug that the prince is dangerous, but Ladybug still believes she's just an innocent girl and promises to protect her. Not long afterward, the elder boards the train. As soon as he hears the prince speak, he recognizes her voice and immediately realizes she is lying. He also tells everyone that Wataru is safe because an undercover bodyguard already killed the man guarding him at the hospital. After the prince escapes, the elder explains his own reason for being there. White Death murdered his wife while taking over the Minegishi crime family, and the elder believes fate has brought everyone together for one final chance at revenge. The group soon discovers that Yuichi survived his gunshot wound, and Lemon also survived because he was secretly wearing a bulletproof vest now. The four unlikely allies, Ladybug, Yuichi, Lemon, and the Elder, join forces to take down White Death. When the train finally reaches Kyoto, Ladybug hands the briefcase over to White Death. At the same time, the prince reveals that she's actually White Death's estranged daughter. She tries to trick him into shooting her with Yuichi's rigged handgun, hoping the weapon will explode and kill him, but her plan fails. White Death then reveals the shocking truth. Almost every assassin on the train played some role in his wife's death. Lemon and Tangerine wiped out his crew during the Bolivia mission. His son got arrested because of the chaos, forcing White Death's wife to travel and bail him out. On the way, she was badly injured in a car accident. The only heart surgeon who could have saved her was poisoned by Hornet before surgery. Carver, the assassin Ladybug replaced, had also been sent to kill White Death but accidentally killed his wife instead. White Death secretly brought all these assassins together, hoping they would destroy each other. White Death's men finally open the briefcase, triggering the hidden explosives. The blast throws Ladybug and White Death back onto the train. Soon afterward, White Death's remaining soldiers storm the train, leading to one massive final battle. The Elder faces White Death in an intense sword fight, while the out-of-control bullet train crashes straight through downtown Kyoto. After surviving the crash, White Death crawls out of the wreckage with the Elder's katana still stuck in his chest. He tries to kill Ladybug one last time, but Yuichi's rigged gun explodes, finally killing him. The prince then grabs a machine gun and declares herself the new White Death. Just when it looks like she's about to win, a speeding fruit truck loaded with tangerines slams into her, killing her instantly. The truck is revealed to be driven by Lemon, who gets revenge for his brother Tangerine's death in the most unexpected way possible. In the end, Maria arrives to pick up Ladybug. After surviving non-stop assassins, explosions, betrayals, and a train wreck, Ladybug is finally happy to step off the bullet train alive, while Japanese authorities rush in to deal with the unbelievable destruction left behind. Casting the ensemble assembled for Bullet Train stands as one of the more deliberate and star-driven collections of talent in recent Hollywood action cinema, assembled under the guidance of director David Leitch and producers Kelly McCormick and Antoine Fuqua. The process unfolded across 2020 and into early 2021 against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, with casting decisions shaped by a desire for high-profile names capable of delivering both physical intensity and heightened comedic timing. The source material, Kotaro Isaka's 2010 novel Maria Beetle, published in English as Bullet Train, provided a framework of interconnected assassins whose missions collide on a high-speed Shinkansen, but the film adaptations significantly expanded the ethnic and national diversity of the characters while retaining the Japanese setting. Brad Pitt's attachment as Ladybug anchored the entire casting effort. Announced in July 2020, Pitt's involvement came after Leitch and McCormick identified the character as ideal for the actor. Ladybug is a skilled but chronically unlucky American assassin seeking a quieter existence, guided remotely by his handler and determined to avoid unnecessary violence after a string of catastrophic jobs. Pitt's prior collaboration with Leach as a stunt performer on projects including Fight Club created a foundation of mutual trust. Reports indicated Pitt received a substantial fee in the region of $20 million. The actor leaned into the role's physical comedy and underdog quality, insisting on a distinctive visual presentation that included a bucket hat and thick-rimmed glasses, choices that initially concerned studio executives focused on maximizing his recognizable star power, but ultimately reinforced the character's everyman fatalism. Pitt performed approximately 95% of his own stunts, training extensively with stunt coordinator Greg Rementer in the months leading up to production. Sessions often took place at Pitt's residence, where other cast members joined for choreography work. This commitment to practical action aligned with Leach's background and helped set the physical standard for the ensemble. Joey King's casting as the prince followed closely after Pitt's. Negotiations began in the summer of 2020, with the role representing a significant shift from King's earlier work in the Kissing Booth franchise and the true crime miniseries The Act. In the film, the prince is a manipulative young assassin who poses as a schoolgirl, orchestrating events with cold calculation and personal vengeance against the White Death. King has spoken of auditioning without high expectations of securing the part, viewing it as a long shot given the competition. Once attached, she approached the character with a British accent and a deceptive innocence that masked sociopathic tendencies. The role required both sharp dialogue delivery and participation in the film's elaborate fight sequences, contributing to the ensemble's overall tone of exaggerated, almost cartoonish violence. Aaron Taylor-Johnson joined as Tangerine in October 2020. The British actor plays one half of a fraternal assassin duo, the more disciplined and procedural of the pair. Taylor-Johnson had previously declined a role in Leach's Deadpool 2, creating an earlier professional connection that he leveraged when pursuing Tangerine. Leach initially told him that multiple higher-profile actors were also interested and that he would need to compete. Taylor-Johnson responded by preparing intensively, demonstrating the character's East End energy in virtual meetings during the pandemic. Once cast, he and his on-screen partner developed a strong improvisational rapport that amplified the comic energy of their scenes. Taylor-Johnson's physical preparation included mastering a distinctive walk and fighting style that emphasized precision and aggression, complementing the broader, more chaotic energy of his counterpart. Brian Tyree Henry's casting as Lemon completed the twin assassin pairing. Also announced in October 2020, Henry brought a different energy rooted in his stage and screen work, including Atlanta and The Falcon and The Winter Soldier. Lemon is defined by an obsessive attachment to Thomas the Tank Engine, a trait carried over from the novel and expanded for comedic effect. Henry's performance balances menace with unexpected warmth and philosophical digressions about the children's show, creating one of the film's most memorable characterizations. The chemistry between Henry and Taylor-Johnson became a highlight of production. The pair frequently improvised, pushing the characters toward broader, more theatrical territory that Leach encouraged after early test screenings, confirmed the audience's positive response. Their shared history as twins, who are not actually related but operate as a unit, allowed for layered banter that grounded the escalating chaos. Andrew Koji's selection as Yuichi Kimura, known as the father, added a critical Japanese presence among the leads. Cast in September 2020, Koji was already known for his work in the series Warrior. Kimura boards the train seeking the person who pushed his young son from a rooftop, only to find himself manipulated by the prince. Koji's performance anchors the more grounded emotional stakes of the story, providing a counterpoint to the flamboyant assassins around him. Alongside Hiroyuki Sanada, who plays Kimura's father, the elder Koji represents the film's strongest connection to the original novel's Japanese cultural context. Sanada, a veteran of both Japanese cinema and international productions, including The Last Samurai and Avengers Endgame, joined in November 2020. The elder is a former Yakuza figure seeking resolution with the White Death. Sanada's presence lends gravitas and authenticity to the familial and criminal underworld elements. Both actors have emphasized that the Japanese characters form the emotional core of the narrative. With Kimura's arc driving much of the plot's resolution, Michael Shannon's casting as the White Death, announced in November 2020, provided the film with its primary antagonist. Shannon's reputation for intense, unsettling performances made him a natural fit for the Russian-born crime lord who has taken control of a Japanese Yakuza organization. The White Death's motivations, revenge for his wife's death, and a calculated plan to gather those peripherally responsible on the same train supply the connective tissue for the ensemble's colliding missions. Shannon's limited but pivotal screen time relies on presence and controlled menace rather than extensive action choreography. Zazie Beetz joined the same month as The Hornet, a specialist in poisons whose methods prove central to several key deaths. Beetz, recognized for Atlanta and Deadpool 2, brought a cool, lethal efficiency to the role. Her character's confrontations, particularly with Ladybug, showcased the film's inventive use of confined spaces and unconventional weapons. Logan Lerman was cast as the son, the White Death's offspring, whose presence on the train sets several plots in motion. Lerman's earlier work in the Percy Jackson series and The Perks of Being a Wallflower gave way to a more vulnerable, short-lived role that nonetheless carries significant narrative weight. Bad Bunny, credited under his birth name Benito A. Martinez Ocasio, entered the cast in December 2020 as The Wolf. The Puerto Rican musician and occasional actor had appeared in Narcos, Mexico, and was sought after for his global profile and physical presence. Producer Kelly McCormick suggested him as a fresh alternative to more conventional choices for the role of a Mexican cartel figure seeking vengeance for his wife's murder at their wedding. Leach has described the decision as one of the production's smartest, noting that Bad Bunny's youth and intensity reframed the character from a grizzled veteran to a passionate, newly bereaved lover. The actor trained rigorously for the fight sequences, contributing a distinctive style that mixed raw aggression with the film's stylized violence. Sandra Bullock's attachment as Maria, Ladybug's handler, came later in February 2021. She replaced Lady Gaga, who had been in discussions but withdrew due to scheduling conflicts with House of Gucci. Bullock's role is largely voice-driven for much of the runtime, offering guidance, exasperation, and dry humor through Ladybug's earpiece before appearing in person near the climax. Pitt's long-standing friendship with Bullock facilitated the casting. He has spoken of relying on her reliability and distinctive vocal presence for the character's authoritative yet affectionate tone. The decision also created a reciprocal favor, as Pitt later appeared in Bullock's The Lost City. Supporting roles further diversified the ensemble. Masi Oka appears as the train conductor, Karen Fukuhara as a concession girl, and a range of Japanese and international performers fill passenger, thug, and flashback positions. Uncredited cameos include Channing Tatum as a train passenger and Ryan Reynolds as the original assignee Carver, the latter serving as a reciprocal gesture after Pitt's cameo in Deadpool 2. Leach himself appears briefly as one of the many victims of Lemon and Tangerine's earlier exploits. The casting process emphasized performance first, followed by physical evaluation and stunt training. Leach has explained that the team sought actors capable of embodying heightened, almost archetypal characters before adapting choreography to their individual strengths. Training camps allowed the ensemble to develop fighting styles unique to each assassin. Ladybug's improvisational anti-gun approach, the twins' coordinated aggression, the prince's deceptive agility, the wolf's raw power. Production designer David Schoenemann and cinematographer Jonathan Sella supported these performances by constructing detailed train car sets on a Sony soundstage in Culver City, using LED screens to simulate the Japanese landscape outside the windows. The confined environment demanded precise timing and spatial awareness from every performer. Controversy arose over the predominantly non-Japanese casting of characters originating in a Japanese novel set entirely in Japan. Critics, including representatives of the Japanese American Citizens League, argued that the decision constituted whitewashing by prioritizing Western stars while relegating Japanese actors to secondary roles despite maintaining the Tokyo to Kyoto setting. Andrew Koji remains the most prominent Japanese lead among the assassins, with Sanada providing additional presence. Author Kotaro Isaka responded by describing his characters as ethnically malleable and not real people. suggesting they need not be interpreted as strictly Japanese. Screenwriter Zach Olkevich and director Leach echoed this view, noting that Tokyo's international character allowed for a multicultural collision of types and that the story's strength transcended specific ethnic origins. Leach acknowledged internal discussions about relocating the setting but ultimately retained Japan for its visual and cultural specificity. Defenders of the casting pointed to the inclusion of Black, Latino, and Asian performers as evidence of intentional diversity rather than erasure, while detractors maintained that the Japanese context of the source material demanded greater representation in leading roles. The ensemble's collective star power and complementary skills enabled the film's distinctive tone, a blend of elaborate practical action, dark humor, and interlocking narratives. Each major casting choice reinforced specific thematic or stylistic elements. Pitt's everyman fatalism, King's deceptive youth, the twins' vaudevillian partnership, Koji and Sanada's grounded emotional stakes, Shannon's cold authority, Beats' clinical lethality, Bad Bunny's passionate intensity, and Bullock's remote oversight. Secondary and cameo appearances added texture and surprise without disrupting the central dynamics. The result is a cast that functions less as a traditional hierarchy of leads and supports and more as a rotating gallery of vivid personalities whose collisions drive the narrative forward at high speed. The careful calibration of talent, physical preparation, and tonal alignment remains one of the production's most distinctive achievements. Production development and pre-production, the road that led to Bullet Train arriving in theaters in the summer of 2022, was considerably longer and more winding than the finished film's breezy, hyperactive tone might suggest. The project had its roots in an adaptation effort spearheaded by director and producer Antoine Fuqua, who began developing a version of the story through his own production banner, Fuqua Films, well before David Leitch became attached. Fuqua's early involvement is easy to overlook once the film is discussed purely in terms of Leitch's finished product, but it was Fuqua who first saw cinematic potential in Kotaro Isaka's source novel and who continued to serve as a producer on the film even after the director's chair changed hands. This detail matters because it explains something notable about the finished movie. The version audience eventually saw in 2022 was tonally very different from what had originally been envisioned. In its earliest incarnation, the adaptation was conceived as a straightforward, hard-edged action thriller, closer in spirit to a grim crime drama than to the anarchic, quip-heavy spectacle that eventually reached screens. Over the course of development, the project's tone shifted substantially, evolving into a self-aware action comedy that leaned into absurdist humor, cartoonish violence, and a constant stream of pop culture-inflected banter between its ensemble of assassins. This transformation did not happen overnight. It was the product of a development process where multiple hands, screenwriters, producers, and eventually a new director reshaped the material until it found its ultimately released form. The project took a decisive step forward in June 2020 when it was announced that Sony Pictures had brought on David Leitch, a filmmaker who had by that point built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most reliable purveyors of stylish kinetic action filmmaking, to direct the adaptation. Leitch's resume prior to Bullet Train included credits as a co-director on the first John Wick film, sole directing credit on Atomic Blonde, the blockbuster spin-off Hobbs and Shaw, and Deadpool 2, all films built around elaborate, carefully choreographed set pieces and a certain wry, knowing sense of humor. That sensibility made him a natural fit for a project that was already drifting toward comedic territory, and his hiring effectively cemented the direction the film would take from that point forward. The screenplay was credited to Zach Olkevich, who was tasked with translating Isaka's Japanese set novel, originally published in 2010 and centered on a group of professional killers whose paths cross violently aboard a high-speed train, into an English-language screenplay suitable for a major American studio production. Casting proceeded quickly once Leitch was attached, and the process reveals a great deal about how the project was positioned within the marketplace from the outset. Brad Pitt was cast in the lead role the following month, in July 2020, a signing that instantly elevated the project's profile and signaled Sony's ambitions for the film as a major star vehicle. Pitt's casting came with a significant price tag. Reporting from Variety indicated that the actor was paid $20 million for his role, a figure consistent with his standing as one of the industry's most bankable leading men. With Pitt attached as the anchor of the ensemble, the rest of the cast filled in around him over the following months. Joey King, fresh off her breakout success in teen romantic comedies, entered negotiations for a supporting role not long after Pitt's deal was finalized, eventually landing the pivotal part of the prince, a role that would ultimately require her to play sharply against the ingenuine image she had built in earlier work. September 2020 brought the addition of Andrew Koji, an actor best known at that point for his work in the television series Warrior and the Snake Eyes franchise, who was cast in the role of Yuichi Kimura, the grieving father whose search for his son's attacker sets the plot in motion. The following month, October 2020, saw two more significant additions. Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry joined the cast as the bickering assassin brothers Tangerine and Lemon, a pairing that would go on to become one of the film's most celebrated creative elements. Taylor Johnson, who had already built a career playing both blockbuster action heroes and prestige-adjacent dramatic roles, and Henry, an actor with a strong theater and television background who had earned considerable acclaim for his dramatic work, made for an unusual but ultimately well-received comic duo. Their brotherly bickering forming much of the connective tissue of the film's midsection. November 2020 proved to be an especially busy month for the production's casting announcements, with several major names joining in quick succession. Zazie Beetz was announced as a cast member, taking on the role of the poison specialist known as the Hornet. Masioka, an actor recognizable to global audiences from his work on the television series Heroes, was added in a supporting capacity as the train's conductor. Michael Shannon, an actor with a long history of playing intense and unpredictable antagonists in prestige and genre films alike, was brought on to play the film's primary villain, the Russian-born crime lord known as the White Death, a character who had seized control of a Yakuza organization and whose actions drive much of the plot's underlying tragedy. Logan Lerman joined as the White Death's son, a role that, without giving too much away regarding the plot's numerous twists, proves to be far more consequential to the story's opening act than his relatively brief screen time might suggest. Hiroyuki Sanada, a veteran of Japanese and international cinema with an extensive career spanning both dramatic roles and action productions, was also confirmed for the cast around this time, taking on the role of the elder Yuichi's father and the family patriarch whose own history with the White Death forms one of the emotional cores of the narrative. Also in that same period, director David Leitch revealed that Karen Fukuhara, an actress known to genre audiences for her work in superhero properties, had joined the production in the role of a concession attendant aboard the train, and that Jonathan Sella would take on the role of cinematographer for the project. Sella's involvement was significant given his prior collaborations with Leitch. The cinematographer had worked with the director on earlier action productions, and that existing creative shorthand would prove valuable in executing the film's technically demanding, largely single-location action sequences. December 2020 brought the addition of the Puerto Rican singer and performer Bad Bunny, credited under his birth name Benito A. Martinez Ocasio, who joined the cast in the role of the Wolf, a Mexican assassin whose storyline in the film revolves around a quest for vengeance against the Hornet. His casting reflected a broader trend of major studios recruiting musicians with a substantial crossover star power into ensemble action productions, a strategy intended to broaden a film's audience appeal beyond traditional movie-going demographics. The final major piece of the ensemble's casting fell into place in February of the following year, 2021, when Sandra Bullock joined the production in the role of Maria Beetle, the off-screen handler who communicates with Pitt's character throughout much of the film via earpiece. Bullock's casting came about as something of a last-minute substitution. She replaced Lady Gaga, who had been attached to the role but ultimately withdrew due to a scheduling conflict with her own commitment to the drama House of Gucci, which was also shooting around the same period. The reshuffling illustrates one of the more common behind-the-scenes realities of large ensemble productions, where scheduling conflicts among in-demand performers can force last-minute recasting even relatively close to a production start date. It has also since come to light that actor Damson Idris was offered a role in the film during the same casting period but was ultimately unable to accept it, reportedly due to conflicting obligations tied to his ongoing work on the television series Snowfall, despite reportedly making efforts to free up his schedule to participate. Looking at the assembled ensemble as a whole, one of the more striking features of Bullet Train's casting strategy was its determination to stack the film with recognizable faces in even relatively minor roles, an approach that reflects a broader trend among major studios when greenlighting original, non-franchise action properties without a pre-existing built-in audience. Rather than relying on a single marquee star to carry the entire marketing burden, Sony and the film's producers appear to have deliberately constructed an ensemble in which nearly every named character was played by a performer with some degree of independent audience recognition, whether from prior blockbuster work, prestige television, music stardom, or genre cult status. This loaded ensemble approach, often associated with the kind of stylish crime comedy lineage that traces back through films like the Ocean's 11 series and Snatch, was clearly a deliberate strategic choice on the part of the studio, one intended to give the film multiple overlapping points of audience appeal rather than resting its commercial fortunes on pitch star power alone. The involvement of producer Kelly McCormick alongside Leach and Fuqua is also worth noting in any discussion of the film's development. McCormick, who had previously partnered with Leach on prior action productions through their shared production company, brought considerable experience navigating the particular demands of large-scale, stunt-driven filmmaking, and her presence on the project as a producer reflects the close, long-standing creative partnership she and Leach had already built across several years of prior collaboration by the time Bullet Train entered production. Beyond the credited principal cast, Bullet Train also featured a handful of notable uncredited cameo appearances that would go on to become one of the film's most talked about elements upon release. Channing Tatum appears briefly as a train passenger, while Ryan Reynolds appears in a more substantial uncredited cameo as the assassin Carver, the character whose illness at the story's outset is the reason Pitt's Ladybug is called in to replace him on the mission in the first place. Reynolds' participation carried a layer of behind-the-scenes reciprocity. His cameo was reportedly conceived as a way of returning the favor after Pitt made a surprise cameo appearance in Deadpool 2, another Leach-directed production, back in 2018. Leach himself also makes a brief on-screen appearance in Bullet Train, playing a minor character named Jeff Zufelt, who becomes one of the numerous, largely incidental casualties left in the wake of the destructive antics of Tangerine and Lemon during an earlier rescue operation involving the White Death's son, a bit of dark comic self-effacement that is entirely in keeping with the film's overall tone. Filming principal photography on Bullet Train commenced in Los Angeles, with preparatory production work beginning as early as October 2020 and cameras officially rolling on November 16 of that year. The production's reported budget fell somewhere in the range of $85.9 to $90 million, a substantial but not extravagant figure for an effects and stunt-heavy studio action film featuring a cast of this caliber, reflecting the reality that much of the film's action was grounded in practical stunt work and physical choreography rather than expensive computer-generated set pieces. The production unfolded against the considerable logistical backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, which had reshaped nearly every aspect of how film sets operate throughout 2020 and into 2021. Shooting a large ensemble action film with dozens of principal and supporting cast members, extensive stunt teams, and a full production crew during a period defined by strict health protocols, testing regimens, and social distancing requirements presented obstacles that would have been unimaginable for a production of similar scale just a year earlier. That the filmmakers were able to bring the project to completion at all under these conditions speaks to the elaborate safety and logistical planning that had become standard across the industry during this period. Filming ultimately wrapped in March 2021, meaning the shoot spanned roughly 4 months, a period that included both the technically demanding train set sequences and the numerous stunt-heavy fight scenes woven throughout the narrative. One of the more distinctive elements of the physical production was the construction of the train itself. Because the story takes place almost entirely aboard a fictionalized version of Japan's high-speed Shinkansen rail network, the production team elected to build practical full-scale train car sets rather than attempting to shoot on a real functioning train or rely heavily on green screen environments. The producers had 3 complete train cars constructed for filming, a choice that gave the actors and stunt performers physical, tangible spaces in which to perform the film's elaborate fight choreography rather than having to imagine their surroundings against blank sound stage backdrops. To further sell the illusion that the actors were traveling at high speed through the Japanese countryside, the production rigged large LED screens outside the windows of the train sets, displaying continuously moving footage of passing landscapes. This use of LED wall technology to simulate motion and environment, a technique that has become increasingly common in big-budget filmmaking in the years since, most famously associated with productions using large-scale volume stages, allowed the actors performing on the fixed soundstage-bound train sets to have a constant immersive visual reference point, helping ground their performances even though the train itself never actually left Los Angeles. The physicality of the shoot extended well beyond the built environment and into the extensive stunt work performed throughout the film. Given Leach's own background as a former stuntman and stunt coordinator prior to his transition into directing, a professional history that included doubling work for major stars earlier in his career, it is perhaps unsurprising that Bullet Train placed enormous emphasis on grounded, practical stunt choreography throughout its many hand-to-hand and weapons-based combat sequences. Greg Rementer, the film's stunt coordinator, stated that Brad Pitt performed approximately 95% of his own stunts throughout the production, a remarkably high figure for an actor of Pitt's stature and one that underscores both his personal commitment to the physical demands of the role and the production's broader emphasis on tangible, in-camera action over heavily digital alternatives. This dedication to practical stunt work aligns closely with the aesthetic sensibilities Leach had already established across his prior directorial efforts, all of which built their reputations substantially on the strength of meticulously choreographed, hard-hitting fight sequences performed largely by the actors themselves, with the digital effects reserved for enhancement rather than as a substitute for physical performance. The confined, largely single-location setting of the film, the vast majority of the story takes place within the cramped, corridor-like spaces of train cars, presented its own unique choreographic and cinematographic challenges. Staging prolonged, dynamic fight sequences within the narrow aisles, overhead luggage racks, and seating rows of a train car required inventive blocking and camera work to avoid visual monotony, particularly across a film with as many distinct combat sequences as Bullet Train ultimately contained. Cinematographer Jonathan Sella's task was to find ways to keep the visual language of the film energetic and varied despite the physical constraints of the setting, employing a combination of camera movement, careful lighting design, and effects work to differentiate the many fight sequences from one another and prevent the film's numerous action beats from feeling repetitive. The decision to build practical train car sets rather than shoot aboard an actual functioning Shinkansen carried significant advantages from a filmmaking standpoint, even setting aside the sheer impracticality of choreographing elaborate stunt sequences aboard a real, moving, high-speed train carrying actual passengers. A built set gave the production complete control over camera placement, allowing walls to be removed or repositioned between setups, lighting rigs to be mounted in configurations that would be impossible within a genuine train carriage, and stunt performers to rehearse and execute complex physical business without any of the safety concerns that would attend performing similar action aboard a real vehicle traveling at speed. It also allowed for the repeated resetting required by complicated stunt work, since elaborate fight choreography involving breakaway props, rigged furniture, And coordinated multi-performer combat typically requires numerous takes to get right, something that would have been essentially impossible to achieve on a genuine scheduled rail service. The pandemic era production protocols that governed the shoot also shaped the day to day rhythm of filming in ways that extended well beyond the now familiar practices of mask wearing and regular testing. Many productions during this period in early 2021 operated with restricted numbers of people permitted on set at any given time, tiered zone systems separating cast and essential crew from other personnel, and quarantine period for performers arriving from other jurisdictions. All factors that could meaningfully slow the pace of a shoot involving a large ensemble cast whose scheduling already had to accommodate the individual commitments and availability windows of numerous in-demand stars. That the production nonetheless completed its planned shoot within a period of roughly 4 months from November 2020 to March 2021 without major reported disruption reflects the level of advanced planning and contingency scheduling that had become standard practice across the industry by that stage of the pandemic. Post-production once principal photography wrapped in the spring of 2021, the film moved into an extensive post-production phase overseen by editor Elizabeth Ronaldsdottir, another frequent collaborator of Leach's from his earlier action films. Editing a film of this structural complexity, one built around overlapping timelines, extended flashback sequences that gradually reveal how the various assassin storylines interconnect, and a large ensemble cast whose paths cross and recross throughout a single continuous train journey, required careful attention to pacing and narrative clarity, ensuring that audiences could track the shifting allegiances and buried histories among the characters without becoming lost in the film's nonlinear structural choices. The post-production period also coincided with a series of release date shifts that reflected the still unsettled state of the theatrical marketplace in the aftermath of the pandemic's disruption to cinema attendance patterns, along with ordinary scheduling considerations tied to the broader competitive landscape of the summer movie season. These delays, discussed further below, meant that the film's post-production timeline extended over a considerably longer period than its shooting schedule alone might have suggested, giving the effects, sound, and editing teams additional time to refine the finished cut before its eventual theatrical bow. Visual effects work during post-production was largely used to enhance and augment the film's practical elements rather than to generate entirely digital set pieces. Because so much of the physical production, train interiors, LED projected landscapes, practical stunt choreography had already been captured in camera during filming, the visual effects teams were tasked primarily with tasks like environment extension, safety rig removal, and enhancing certain of the film's more stylized or fantastical action beats rather than constructing entire sequences from scratch. This approach was consistent with the broader philosophy Leach and his collaborators had brought to the production from its earliest planning stages, a preference for tangible, physically grounded action augmented rather than replaced by digital tools. Down design and mixing represent another crucial component of the post-production process for a film so heavily reliant on the visceral impact of its action sequences. A film built around close quarters combat in confined spaces depends enormously on the layering of impact sounds, Foley work, and spatial audio cues to sell the physicality of its fight choreography to an audience, particularly in scenes where the camera itself may be moving quickly or where multiple overlapping altercations are occurring within a single shot. The post-production sound team's work in this respect functioned as an essential, if less publicly discussed, complement to the editing and visual effects processes, helping to ensure that the tactile, grounded quality of the film's practical stunt work translated fully to the finished theatrical experience. The extended post-production window also gave the filmmakers time to fine-tune the film's comedic rhythm, a particularly important consideration given the project's fundamental tonal identity as an action comedy rather than a straight thriller. Comedic timing in editing is notoriously difficult to calibrate, often requiring multiple passes and test screenings to determine which jokes land, which sequences run too long, and where additional room needs to be given for an audience's laughter or reaction before the narrative moves forward. Given that the project itself had evolved substantially in tone since its earliest development stages, arriving at the correct comedic balance in the editing room was very likely one of the more significant creative challenges the post-production team faced in shaping the finished film. The film's score was composed by Dominic Lewis, whose task was to craft music that could support both the film's high-octane action sequences and its constant undercurrent of self-aware comedy. Lewis himself characterized the resulting soundtrack in a telling way, describing it as being centered around all vibe and no technique, a description that captures the deliberately loose, playful, and stylistically eclectic approach the composer took to scoring a film that was, after all, fundamentally more interested in tone and energy than in strict compositional rigor. Beyond Lewis's original score, one of the more memorable and widely discussed musical elements of Bullet Train involves its use of licensed needle drops, several of which were given distinctive new arrangements specifically for the film. Most notably, the production included Japanese language cover versions of two significant pop and rock standards: the Bee Gees' disco anthem Stayin' Alive and Bonnie Tyler's power ballad Holding Out for a Hero. Recontextualizing these two very recognizable Western pop songs through Japanese language covers served a dual purpose within the film, reinforcing its Japanese setting sonically even as its cast leaned heavily toward non-Japanese performers, while also lending an additional layer of ironic, needle-drop-driven humor to some of the film's key sequences, a hallmark of the kind of soundtrack curation that has become closely associated with Leach's directorial style and with the broader genre lineage of stylish, music-driven action comedies that Bullet Train was clearly positioning itself within the film's official soundtrack album. Gathering both original score selections and the licensed and reimagined needle drop tracks featured throughout the picture was released through Arista Records in conjunction with the film's theatrical rollout in August 2022, giving audiences a way to revisit the film's eclectic musical choices independently of the picture itself. The overall musical approach taken with Bullet Train fits comfortably within a broader tradition of genre filmmaking in which a carefully curated soundtrack functions almost as an additional character within the story, shaping audience perception of tone, pacing, and mood as much as any element of dialogue or performance. Films within the crime comedy and stylish action lineage that Bullet Train clearly positions itself alongside have long used popular music, often placed in deliberately incongruous or ironic counterpoint to the on-screen violence, as a way of signaling to audiences that a film should be read as playful and self-aware rather than as a grim, straightforwardly violent thriller. The choice to recast two very familiar, decades-old pop and rock staples through Japanese language covers extends this tradition in a way that is specific to Bullet Train's particular setting and premise, using the recontextualized, culturally translated versions of instantly recognizable Western songs as an audible shorthand for the film's Tokyo to Kyoto setting, even as questions about the authenticity of that Japanese setting given the film's casting choices would go on to generate considerable public discussion following the film's release. Dominic Lewis's broader scoring approach, oriented around mood, texture, and momentum rather than intricate thematic or motivic development, mirrors a similar sensibility found across much of Leach's directorial filmography, in which propulsive rhythm and carefully selected musical cues are consistently prioritized as tools for sustaining audience energy through action sequences, rather than the score serving primarily as a vehicle for deep emotional or character-driven musical storytelling. This is a scoring philosophy well suited to a film whose narrative structure, built around a rotating ensemble of assassins whose backstories are gradually revealed through flashback, benefits enormously from music that can quickly establish or shift tone from scene to scene without requiring extensive thematic development to do so. Raleig's theatrical Bullet Train's path to theaters was anything but a straight line, undergoing multiple release date changes before finally settling into its ultimate August 2022 slot. The film was originally slated for release on April 8, 2022, positioning it as an early spring theatrical offering. That initial date was subsequently pushed back to July 15, 2022, shifting the film into the heart of the competitive summer blockbuster season. A second adjustment then moved the release further to July 29, 2022, before a relatively minor shift settled the film into its ultimate release date of August 5, 2022. Each of these successive delays reflected the kind of scheduling recalibration that had become increasingly common across the film industry in the years following the pandemic's disruption of traditional release patterns, as studios continued to jockey for optimal positioning within an unusually crowded and unpredictable theatrical calendar. Ahead of its wide theatrical release, Bullet Train was given a high-profile world premiere at the historic Grand Rex Cinema in Paris, France on July 18, 2022, an event that drew considerable media attention given the star wattage of its cast, with Brad Pitt in particular making headlines for his appearance at the Parisian premiere alongside other members of the film's ensemble. When the film finally reached wide release in the United States and Canada on August 5, it opened alongside the religious-themed comedy Easter Sunday, giving Bullet Train a relatively uncontested position at the top of that weekend's new releases in terms of scale and star power. Prior to release, trade analysts projected an opening weekend gross somewhere in the range of $26 to $30 million, based on a theatrical footprint of 4,357 locations across North America. The film's actual performance tracked closely with and ultimately slightly exceeded those pre-release projections. Bullet Train earned $12.6 million on its opening day alone, a total that included a robust $4. 6 million haul from Thursday night preview screenings, preview numbers that are often used within the industry as an early bellwether for a film's overall opening weekend strength. The film went on to post a full opening weekend gross of $30 million, comfortably topping the North American box office chart for that frame and validating Sony's decision to position the film as a marquee summer tentpole despite its non-franchise original premise. The film's box office trajectory in subsequent weeks followed a fairly typical pattern for a star-driven action title without the benefit of pre-existing franchise recognition or intellectual property awareness to sustain it through slower weekday attendance. In its second weekend of release, the film earned $13.4 million, a decline of roughly 55% from its opening figure. Though this was still enough for the film to remain in first place at the North American box office for a second consecutive weekend, aided in part by the fact that overall marketplace conditions during that particular late summer frame were relatively soft, with total industry-wide weekend grosses running at their lowest point of the summer season to that point. By its third weekend, the film's earnings had fallen further to $8 million, and its box office rankings slipped correspondingly, with Bullet Train falling to third place as newer releases entered the marketplace and began drawing audiences away from a title that was, by that point, a few weeks removed from its initial promotional push. This front-loaded pattern, a strong opening followed by comparatively rapid week-to-week decline, is a familiar signature of original action films that rely primarily on curiosity, star power, and marketing spend to generate an initial audience, as opposed to franchise titles that can often sustain stronger holds in subsequent weekends due to built-in fan loyalty, repeat viewings, or the kind of cultural word-of-mouth momentum that tends to build around films with pre-existing brand recognition. For a studio like Sony, positioning an original R-rated ensemble action comedy as a marquee summer release always carries an element of risk, precisely because such titles typically cannot rely on the kind of guaranteed opening weekend floor that a recognizable franchise entry can command. The fact that Bullet Train nonetheless managed to top the box office chart in each of its first two weekends suggests that the considerable star power assembled across its ensemble cast, combined with an extensive marketing campaign built around its starry cast list and stylish, high-energy trailers, succeeded in generating the kind of opening weekend curiosity the studio had been counting on. The film's release also arrived at a moment when the broader theatrical marketplace was still very much in a process of recovery and recalibration following the disruptions of the preceding several years, with audiences gradually returning to pre-pandemic movie-going habits at an uneven pace across different demographics and genres. Original action films without franchise ties faced a particularly challenging landscape during this period, competing not only against one another but against a persistent ongoing shift in audience viewing habits towards streaming platforms for exactly the kind of mid-budget genre entertainment that Bullet Train represented. Viewed against that backdrop, the film's ability to secure a decisive opening weekend victory and sustain a top position for a second consecutive week represented a moderately reassuring data point for studios continuing to evaluate whether star-driven, original theatrical action films could still reliably draw audiences into cinemas in a marketplace increasingly dominated by pre-existing franchises and adaptations. Home Media Bullet Train's home entertainment rollout followed a fairly conventional staggered release pattern for a major studio theatrical title of its era, beginning with a digital release on September 27, 2022. Roughly 7 weeks after the film's theatrical debut. This was followed by a physical media release on October 18, 2022, which saw the film made available across the 4K Ultra HD, Blu-ray and standard DVD formats simultaneously, giving consumers a range of options depending on their preferred viewing technology and collecting preferences. The film's subsequent streaming availability was shaped by a set of pre-existing licensing arrangements between Sony Pictures and other major streaming platforms. Bullet Train became available to stream on Netflix in the United States on December 3, 2022, arriving on the platform as part of a broader content deal that Sony and Netflix had struck back in 2021. An agreement that gave Netflix a window of exclusive domestic streaming access to a slate of Sony's theatrical releases during this period. Separately, Sony had also entered into an agreement granting Disney access to certain of its legacy theatrical titles, including Bullet Train, for eventual streaming distribution on Disney's own platforms, Disney Plus and Hulu, as well as potential airings across Disney's linear television networks. Under the terms of that arrangement, however, Disney's access to Bullet Train and other qualifying Sony titles would only begin after those films had already completed their contracted period of exclusive availability on Netflix, meaning the film's eventual arrival on Disney-owned platforms was necessarily delayed relative to its Netflix debut. This layered, multi-platform distribution strategy reflects the increasingly complex licensing landscape that had emerged across the industry in the years following the initial wave of streaming service launches, with individual film titles frequently subject to sequential, contractually staggered windows across multiple competing platforms rather than a single straightforward home video and streaming release. For consumers, this staggered rollout meant that the manner in which they were ultimately able to access Bullet Train varied considerably depending on both timing and platform preference. Those eager to own a physical or high-resolution digital copy of the film had that option available within roughly 2 months of the theatrical release, while those willing to wait somewhat longer or who preferred to access the film through an existing subscription service rather than an individual purchase or rental, eventually gained access through Netflix by early December of the same year. The film's eventual appearance on Disney-controlled platforms represented a further, more delayed distribution window still, contingent on the specific contractual terms governing the handoff between the two companies' respective licensing windows. Taken together, this sequence of release windows illustrates just how fragmented and multi-staged the modern home entertainment landscape had become for major studio theatrical releases by the early 2020s, a marked departure from the comparatively simpler single-network licensing arrangements that had characterized the home video and television marketplace in earlier decades. Reception box office over the course of its full theatrical run, Bullet Train ultimately grossed $103.4 million across the United States and Canada, supplemented by an additional $135.9 million earned across international markets, for a cumulative worldwide box office total of $239.3 million. Measured against the film's reported production budget of somewhere between $85, and $90 million, this overall performance represented a moderately successful outcome for the studio, though one that fell well short of blockbuster-level returns once the substantial costs of print, advertising, and marketing expenses that are not reflected in the production budget figure alone and often run to tens of millions of dollars for a wide release studio film of this scale are factored into any full accounting of the project's overall profitability. Internationally, the film's performance varied considerably from market to market, with the 5 highest grossing territories outside the United States and Canada being the United Kingdom, France, Mexico, Australia, and Spain. A spread of markets that reflects the broad, star-driven international appeal that a Brad Pitt-led action vehicle could reasonably be expected to generate across both English-speaking and non-English-speaking territories alike. Notably, the film's performance in Japan itself, the country in which its story is explicitly set, and a market whose reaction to the film's casting choices was watched with particular interest given the controversy discussed further below, was comparatively modest, with the film grossing $7 million, 92,566 sets in that territory, a figure that places Japan well outside the ranks of the film's top-performing international markets despite the story's Japanese setting and its roots in a best-selling Japanese novel. Taken as a whole, Bullet Train's box office trajectory illustrates a fairly common pattern for original non-franchise action films built around A-list star power in the contemporary theatrical marketplace. A strong, front-loaded opening driven by the drawing power of its cast and extensive marketing push, followed by a comparatively steep decline in subsequent weeks as the absence of pre-existing brand recognition or built-in fan enthusiasm limited the film's ability to sustain momentum against a rotating slate of new competing releases throughout the remainder of the crowded summer season. It is also worth situating Bullet Train's financial performance within the broader context of Brad Pitt's career as a box office draw at the time of the film's release. By 2022, Pitt had spent several decades as one of the most bankable and internationally recognizable leading men in the industry, and his continued ability to open a film that is to generate a substantial opening weekend gross primarily on the strength of his own name recognition rather than any pre-existing franchise or intellectual property remained a subject of ongoing interest among industry analysts tracking the broader decline of traditional movie stardom as a reliable box office driver in an era increasingly dominated by franchise filmmaking. Bullet Train's solidly successful opening weekend, achieved without the benefit of any built-in fan base or existing cinematic universe to draw upon, offered at least some evidence that a sufficiently starry ensemble cast, paired with an aggressive and stylish marketing campaign, could still reliably generate meaningful opening weekend interest even for wholly original theatrical properties. The gap between the film's worldwide gross and its production budget also invites some further context regarding the overall economics of mid to large budget original action filmmaking during this period. While a worldwide total of $239, $3 million against a reported budget in the $85.9 to $90 million range might on its surface appear to represent a comfortable multiple of the film's production costs, the realities of modern theatrical distribution economics complicate any straightforward assessment of profitability. Studios typically retain only a portion of total box office receipts after exhibitor splits are accounted for, and marketing and distribution costs for a wide release studio tentpole of this scale frequently rival or even exceed the film's actual production budget once global advertising campaigns, premiere events, junkets, and promotional partnerships are factored in. Viewed through that lens, Bullet Train's box office performance likely represented a genuinely profitable, if relatively modest, outcome for Sony rather than the kind of runaway blockbuster success that would have justified an immediate franchise expansion, a distinction that helps explain why the film, despite its starry cast and eventual home media and streaming success, did not go on to spawn an immediate sequel or spin-off in the years following its release. Critical reaction to Bullet Train upon its release was, on balance, decidedly mixed, a characterization borne out clearly by the film's aggregate scores on the two most widely referenced review aggregation platforms. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film held a 52% approval rating based on 341 collected critics' reviews, with an average score of 5.6 out of 10, placing it squarely in mixed territory by the site's own classification standards. The site's consensus summary characterized the film's colorful ensemble and rapid-fire action as compelling enough to sustain viewer interest for much, though not quite all, of its runtime, suggesting that the story's narrative substance ultimately proved less durable than its stylistic surface pleasures. On Metacritic, which aggregates and weights critical reviews somewhat differently, the film received a score of 49 out of 100 based on 61 critics, a figure that the site itself classifies as indicating mixed or average reviews, both aggregate scores telling essentially the same story of a critical community sharply divided on the film's merits, with plenty of detractors matched by an almost equally sizable contingent of more enthusiastic reviewers. This division was reflected clearly across the individual reviews published by prominent critics at the time of the film's release. Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times was among the more enthusiastic voices, awarding the film 3.5 out of 4 stars and describing it as thoroughly entertaining, while singling out for praise both the ensemble's performances and the inventive, deliberately over-the-top violence woven throughout its many action sequences, along with what he considered to be the film's sharp screenwriting. Peter DeBruge, writing for Variety, offered a more ambivalent assessment, suggesting the film seemed to draw stylistic inspiration from earlier crime comedies like Snatch and displayed a Kill Bill-style blend of martial arts choreography, manga-inspired visual sensibility, and the chatty, motor-mouth tone associated with Hitman genre films, while ultimately concluding that it lacked the distinctive creative vision or genuine wit that those clear influences might have implied it would possess. Other critics were considerably harsher. Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph awarded the film just 1 out of 5 stars, arguing that Pitt, then 58 years old, was poorly suited to the kind of wisecracking, motor-mouth persona the role called for, suggesting that virtually every element of the character seemed better tailored to Ryan Reynolds, Leach's collaborator on the Deadpool franchise, than to Pitt himself, and comparing the film's sprawling ensemble cast and inflated runtime to the star-studded comic caper films of the 1960s, albeit crossed with an unpleasant, headache-inducing quality. Clarice Lawfrey, reviewing for The Independent, gave the film 2 out of 5 stars, finding Pitt's performance amusing in isolation but characterizing the film as a whole as straining so hard for quirky effect that watching it felt akin to observing a child repeatedly demanding attention before ultimately overreaching entirely. Donald Clark of the Irish Times, also awarding 2 out of 5 stars, dismissed the plot as an insubstantial tangle in which the safest assumption for the viewer was simply that every character would eventually betray every other character, and further criticized the film's dialogue for leaning too heavily into the kind of pop culture saturated referential banter that he attributed as an unfortunate stylistic legacy of filmmaker Quentin Tarantino's influence on the broader crime comedy genre. Notably, this critical ambivalence stood in fairly sharp contrast to the far more enthusiastic reception the film received from general movie-going audiences. Polling conducted by CinemaScore found that audiences who had seen the film during its opening weekend awarded it an average grade of B. on the service's letter grade scale, running from A+ down to F, a solidly positive score reflecting genuine audience satisfaction upon leaving theaters. Separately, exit polling conducted by PostTrack found that 82% of surveyed audience members rated the film positively overall, with 63% of respondents indicating they would definitely recommend the film to others, both figures reinforcing the sense that Bullet Train played considerably better with everyday audiences than it did with the professional critical establishment, a divergence that is not uncommon for glossy, star-driven genre entertainment built more around momentum and spectacle than around the kind of narrative or thematic depth that tends to draw more uniform critical acclaim. Beyond the film's mixed critical scorecard, Bullet Train also became the center of a substantial public controversy concerning its casting choices, specifically the decision to fill many of its leading roles, characters who were explicitly written as Japanese in Kotaro Isaka's original novel, with predominantly non-Asian actors, Brad Pitt and Joey King chief among them. This controversy, often characterized in media coverage using the industry term whitewashing generated substantial commentary from advocacy organizations, journalists, and industry observers in the lead up to and following the film's release. David Ino, executive director of the Japanese American Citizens League, was among the more prominent critical voices, arguing that while casting American performers might have been entirely reasonable had the filmmakers chosen to relocate the story's setting to the United States, the production's decision to retain the novel's original Japanese setting while simultaneously relegating its Japanese characters to secondary or background roles served only to deepen legitimate concerns about whitewashing. Inu further questioned what he characterized as the willingness of the film's non-Asian stars to accept roles that had been written as Japanese characters and criticized the production more broadly for reinforcing what he viewed as an unfounded industry assumption that Asian actors were incapable of anchoring a major studio blockbuster on their own. A claim, he noted, stood at odds with the substantial box office and critical success of prior Asian-led Hollywood productions such as Crazy Rich Asians in 2018 and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings in 2021. Additional criticism along similar lines came from Eric Francisco, writing for the entertainment outlet Inverse, who observed that unless audiences had specifically sought out the film's individual character promotional posters, they might not readily recognize that the film actually did feature notable Asian talent among its ensemble at all, given how the marketing and overall visual framing of the film tended to foreground its non-Asian stars. Francisco argued that the persistent Hollywood assumption that Asian actors lack sufficient star power to anchor major productions was, in his view, a self-fulfilling prophecy perpetuated by the industry's own unwillingness to give Asian performers those leading opportunities in the first place, rather than reflecting any genuine deficit of audience interest or drawing power on the part of Asian talent themselves. The controversy also prompted responses from figures directly involved with the project, including the novel's original author. Kotaro Isaka, when asked directly about the casting controversy, offered a defense of the finished film, describing his characters as fundamentally ethnically malleable and suggesting that the novel's original Japanese setting and cultural context were ultimately not essential to the story he had written, since in his own framing the characters were not meant to represent real people and were not necessarily even intended to be understood as specifically Japanese. Sanford Panich, president of Sony Pictures Motion Picture Group, subsequently pointed to Isaka's own comments in defending the studio's casting decisions, maintaining that the finished film remained faithful to what he described as the novel's underlying Japanese soul, even while taking the opportunity to cast internationally recognizable stars and adapt the material for what he characterized as a truly global audience and scale. Screenwriter Zach Olkowicz offered a related defense, arguing that the decision to cast performers beyond the pool of Japanese or broader Asian actors actually demonstrated the underlying strength and universality of Isaka's original material, since it proved to be a story capable of transcending any single racial or ethnic framing. Director David Leitch, for his part, revealed that discussions had in fact taken place during the film's pre-production phase regarding the possibility of relocating the story's setting away from Japan entirely, but that the decision was ultimately made to retain Isaka's original Tokyo setting specifically because of the strong international appeal and recognizability that the Japanese bullet train setting was seen as offering. These various defenses did not go unchallenged. Guy Aoki, president of the advocacy organization Media Action Network for Asian Americans, was particularly pointed in his response, characterizing Isaka's ethnically malleable defense as a fundamentally unconvincing statement, and noting that the characters as originally depicted within the novel itself were, in his reading, unambiguously and clearly written as Japanese. Aoki went further, describing Isaka in notably harsh terms as an embarrassing example of an artist selling out his own material's cultural specificity for the sake of a lucrative international adaptation deal. Aoki also directed pointed criticism at both Olkowicz and Leitch for their respective public defenses of the casting decisions, arguing that a story genuinely strong enough to transcend race, as the screenwriter had claimed, would not have been placed at any meaningful commercial risk by instead casting more Japanese or broader Asian actors in its leading roles. He additionally accused the filmmakers of leveraging the film's casting of black and Latino performers in certain supporting assassin roles as a means of deflecting or diluting the broader whitewashing accusations being leveled against the production. The controversies surrounding Bullet Train's casting did not emerge in a cultural vacuum. Rather, it arrived amid an ongoing, broader industry-wide conversation about representation and casting practices in Hollywood adaptations of Asian source material that had already been building momentum for several years prior to the film's release. Earlier controversies involving other major studio productions accused of similarly sidelining Asian characters or casting non-Asian performers in roles rooted in Asian source material had already established much of the vocabulary and framing that would go on to shape public discussion of Bullet Train's own casting choices, including the specific charge of whitewashing itself, a term that had by this point become a well-established part of mainstream entertainment journalism's critical vocabulary. At the same time, the specific box office successes of Crazy Rich Asians and Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings, both cited directly by critics of Bullet Train's casting, had provided commentators with concrete recent counterexamples to push back against long-standing industry assumptions regarding the commercial viability of Asian-led blockbuster filmmaking, giving the criticism directed at Bullet Train a specific evidence-based dimension that distinguished it from purely abstract arguments about representation. The controversy also highlighted a recurring tension within these debates between the perspectives of the original source material's creator and the concerns raised by advocacy groups and commentators based primarily within the American entertainment industry and its associated cultural conversations. Isaka's own comparatively relaxed attitude toward the ethnic specificity of his characters, as expressed in his public comments defending the adaptation, illustrated a genuine divergence in framing between an author working primarily within and for a Japanese domestic literary and entertainment marketplace, where questions of American-style racial representation politics carry a different cultural resonance, and the specifically American frameworks of representation and advocacy that shaped much of the critical response to the film's casting once it reached the US market. This divergence, explicitly noted by commentators including Francisco, added an additional layer of complexity to a controversy that might otherwise have been framed in more straightforwardly binary terms. Providing further context to the debate, Francisco later observed that Isaka himself, as a Japanese national, along with much of the broader audience across Asia, tends to primarily consume and support the domestic film industries of their own respective countries, turning to Hollywood productions specifically for the spectacle value of seeing international foreign stars on screen, an observation intended to highlight the meaningful distinctions between the perspectives and priorities of Asian audiences based within Asia itself, on the one hand, and the specific concerns of the Asian American community regarding representation within the American entertainment industry, on the other. Beyond the specific scores and individual review excerpts, it is worth noting the broader pattern that emerged across the critical conversations surrounding Bullet Train. Reviewers who responded favorably to the film tended to focus their praise specifically on its ensemble performances, particularly the comic chemistry between Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry as the bickering assassin brothers Tangerine and Lemon, a pairing that was frequently singled out across multiple reviews, favorable and unfavorable alike, as one of the film's most successful creative elements regardless of a given critic's overall assessment of the picture as a whole. Henry's performance in particular, built around his character's odd but endearing fixation with the British children's franchise Thomas and Friends, was repeatedly cited by critics as a highlight, with several reviewers noting that his comic timing and specific character choices helped ground some of the film's more absurdist tendencies in something resembling genuine felt characterization rather than pure stylistic bravado. By contrast, critics who responded less favorably to the film frequently pointed to structural and tonal issues as the source of their reservations, including what several described as an overstuffed plot, burdened by an excessive number of characters, twists, and flashback-driven backstory reveals, along with a screenplay that leaned heavily on a specific brand of glib, self-aware, pop culture referencing dialogue that had by 2022 become closely associated with, and in the eyes of some critics, somewhat overused within a particular strand of post-Tarantino crime and action comedy filmmaking. Several reviews explicitly drew comparisons between Bullet Train and earlier films within this broader stylistic lineage, variously invoking Guy Ritchie's early crime comedies, Quentin Tarantino's genre-blending filmography, and the Kill Bill films specifically, generally to suggest that Bullet Train, while clearly indebted to and directly inspired by these earlier works, ultimately fell short of matching either their formal inventiveness or the sharper edges of their comic sensibility. The runtime and structural density of the film were likewise recurring points of critical discussion. At 126 minutes, Bullet Train is not an unusually long film by contemporary studio blockbuster standards, but several critics nonetheless felt that its constant procession of new characters, extended flashback sequences unpacking each assassin's backstory and motivation, and frequent narrative rug pulls created a sense of the film's pacing dragging or its plot mechanics becoming needlessly convoluted, particularly in the film's midsection, even as its opening and closing sequences were generally regarded as tighter and more effectively paced, despite the mixed critical reception and the substantial controversy surrounding its casting. Bullet Train nevertheless received a number of formal industry recognitions in the months following its release, reflecting its considerable commercial visibility and its strong reception among general audiences, even where professional critics remained divided. At the 2022 People's Choice Awards, the film picked up nominations in the categories of Movie of 2022 and Action Movie of 2022, while Brad Pitt received an individual nomination for Male Movie Star of 2022, and Joey King was recognized with nominations in both the Female Movie Star of 2022 and Action Movie Star of 2022 categories. The film also received a nomination for Best Action or Adventure Film at the 51st Saturn Awards, an annual ceremony that has historically focused on recognizing achievement within science fiction, fantasy, and horror genre filmmaking, further cementing Bullet Train's place within that broader category of star-driven genre entertainment, even as its ultimate critical and cultural legacy remained shaped as much by its representation controversy as by its box office performance or the specific merits of its filmmaking craft.